artists, dancers, and one philosopher, who are all part of this legacy of Butoh. And if they hadn't been so kind and generous with their time in speaking to me in all these conversations, then this book wouldn't really have come to life. So really these conversations with them form the backbone of it, especially Yoshito Ono, who is the son of Kazuo Ono. And for those who are really new to Butoh, who's really new? Who knows a little bit about Butoh? Who knows nothing? Ah, okay. So I'm going to speak for beginner's mind, as the Buddhists would say. So Kazuo Ono was the co-founder of Butoh, and Yoshito Ono is his son, with whom I had the joy of studying for 3 years. And the Onos were very kind, the whole family of the Onos, in that they enabled me to get a visa to stay in Japan, and that's how I was able to 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 write this book. So have I said everything? 35 minutes seems like a long time, but it's actually quite short when you're up here. So I'm just going to take my watch off so I can be on time. So Butoh, as heard by a dancer, is the name of this book. And so as heard is maybe the clue to tell you that this is not an academic theory of Butoh, okay? I am a practitioner, and I didn't really actually set out to write a book. I just set out to go and learn and listen and imbibe Butoh. So as I was saying, I was very lucky to be able to stay in Japan for 3 years with this visa. I went there on a Lisa Ullman scholarship. That's somebody else who I need to thank. Lisa Ullman was a dancer who set up a scholarship fund for dancers. And but so I went there to learn from these people, and the book is really about what is called direct transmission, really. So it's about these conversations that I had with these artists, and then being a practitioner, I really wanted to share how this knowledge came across in my own practice. And so a lot of the passages, and I will read you some of them, have they're a form of embodied writing. So what I want to do is propagate this direct transmission that I got through these conversations with these dancers. And so the idea of hearing, it's a form of embodied listening, of being very porous and very attentive and attuned to these encounters with these people. The form of direct transmission is actually a pedagogical form that originates in India, which is called the Guru Shishya Parampara. And Parampara means lineage. And it's a form of teaching that is really used. It's about proximity. It's about an intimate spiritual relationship, not a physical relationship, although, of course, it gets abused sometimes. But it's about an intimate spiritual relationship, which is based on commitment, on trust, and also on obedience. So, I mean, in that's the kind of model that I was pursuing, but parampara means lineage. And as you'll hear as I keep going in the talk, the idea of lineage in Butoh is quite difficult, because there are many lineages, in a way, in Butoh. So, yes, one thing I wanted to say is that sutras, Buddhist sutras, they begin with "so I have heard." So it's not about you're creating new knowledge, is that through bodies, through this form of proximity, you are passing knowledge from person to person. It's not something that you're going to learn on YouTube. It's something that you're imbibing, and it's a form of it's a form of learning that is really good for, according to the Parampara model, advanced knowledge, subtle knowledge, and embodied knowledge. So it felt like it was really good for Butoh, for learning Butoh from these teachers in direct contact with them. So this is a great photo. When I put this into a presentation into PowerPoint that uses AI, the AI suggested that it was a group of people playing the guitar. Although there is somebody playing the guitar with a head, as you can see. So this is, for those who are new to Butoh, the founder of Butoh is called Tatsumi Hijikata. And this is Tatsumi Hijikata with something wrapped around his head. This is called a rehearsal at the Asbestos Can. I also want to thank the Tatsumi Hijikata archive at Keio University, who has given me access to these photos, actually. These are all archival photos. And so what was happening in the early phase of Butoh, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but as Butoh was developing in the 60s and 70s, it was very much based on this proximity to the teachers. So in this, as you can see, it looks like a fun place. It's called the Asbestos Can. You're probably wondering, what does Asbestos Can mean? It was the name of the studio where they rehearsed, and it was Hijikata's wife's father. So his father-in-law was in the asbestos trade, and they decided to honor him by calling the studio where they rehearsed the Asbestos Can. But anyway, I think it's quite fitting for Butoh, which is all about death and darkness and things like that. So just to explain that. But yeah, so the Asbestos Can, this studio space, also became like the place where they gathered, where people lived in close proximity to Hijikata, where Kazuo Ono, who is the co-founder, was also coming to teach. And I write about this in the book, especially in my conversation with Natsu Nakajima, who was one of the first women to really be dancing Butoh, how she really had to kind of bang the doors down of the Asbestos Can because they didn't want to admit women in at that time. So maybe I'm going to read you a part of the book so that you get a sense of how the book is written, why I'm saying it's not an academic book. It's a book really by a practitioner, and it's really to encourage the practice. And I did want to ask you all a question at the beginning of the talk so that you can hold that question. It's not a question that has an answer, but you just hold it throughout the talk. And the question is, how do you live existence through and with this body that you inhabit? So how do you live existence through this body that you inhabit? Okay, so I'll start reading a few things. Just getting my invisible glasses out. So just in relation to this question that I just offered you, I just wanted to read the opening lines of a text by Komurobushi, and I'm not going to use the Japanese way is normally to say the surname first, but I'm going to say the first name first and surname last. So Komurobushi was one of my teachers, and he wrote these wonderful texts. Some of them are in the book, actually. I helped to translate them. I can't say that my Japanese was at that level, but I was helping to get the poetry into them. And this text is called Hinagata, which Ko Murabushi's manager translated to me as the shape of everlasting darkness, Hinagata. So these are the opening lines from Ko. It is a question which violently cuts off the continuation of my thought. How and from where can the total fulfillment of this existence be fathomed within this alien form, which is the fate created by nature? The alien form, of course, being the body. So, just to continue, I will read a little passage from the book, which is about the first time that I visited the Ono studio. When we entered the studio, warm, dry air was already blowing hard from a yellowed aircon unit hanging from the central beam of the white space. The space was enveloped in white light, surrounded by white walls and held by a dark, polished wooden floor. The change in temperature and light made my skin react, shrinking back and tightening. I would learn about it later in Yoshito's lesson, the ritual of arrival that he called meeting the space, when all your senses tune towards the angles, the shadows, the sounds, and the ancestral presences. Because I would learn from him that the difference between any other dance and Butoh is that dance is change in space, and Butoh is transformation of space. I followed Yoshito at a distance, each foot dangling with a weight that made my presence feel too glaring for this environment. I realized that I could quickly learn Yoshito's method of swirling along open curves, and this tactic would dampen the shuddering of my body and of my anxious thoughts. Mutely, we both tracked the emptiness and the fine dust that our movement unsettled. Our furtive, respectful eye contact would sometimes pierce through our circling, returning us to the dimension of harder things, where we couldn't evade the cold floor sucking at our feet, the damp darkness whose muddy fingers were reaching for contact with the soul. Past dancers were leaching through the carpentry. So this passage is from my first visit to the Kazuo Ono studio and meeting Yoshito Ono, the son of Kazuo Ono, for the first time. And he took me into the studio and started dancing with me, and it was very unnerving, especially considering that he was so famous. I was quite taken aback. But I have a little video that I took, and he was very kind. And he told me that I could film the class one day. And so I'll just show you so you get a little view of the inside of that studio. So here, Yoshito Ono, we're in the Kazuo Ono studio, and he is um, the bamboos are actually, they're not props, they are our teachers. And the bamboo is empty inside. And it was really about, you know, through our connection with that bamboo to start to feel the emptiness inside our own bodies, but at the same time the strength that comes from this emptiness. So I will just go on. Okay. So maybe I should have said that first, but but I wanted to leave you guessing a little bit. So what is Butoh exactly? Um, I mean, this is not a question I'm going to answer, and I don't think my book answers the question either, because it's really a multi-headed thing. There is, and that's really what the book is about. This is a photo from the first, what is considered the first performance of Butoh. It's called Kinjiki. It was based on a book by Yukio Mishima, who was already a well-known author at the time. And the book is about homosexuality. And the dance piece was exploring the taboo of homosexuality. And actually, there's a lot of, it looks like there's light, but from what I have heard, um, it took place in almost complete darkness. And it was very shocking for people. It was presented at a dance festival in Tokyo, and Hijikata, Tatsumi Hijikata, who is on the left, and Yoshito Ono, who you just saw teaching in the studio, that's Yoshito Ono on the right. They were the two first dancers. And so Hijikata was thrown out of this, the sort of mainstream dance world with this performance about homosexuality that was completely in the dark. And so this was 1959, and then, so these are the different parts of the book, and in each part you can see who the artists are who I put within that part of the book. But the reason I'm saying that, at first, you know, I was talking about lineage, I was talking about how to hold the lineage through this form of teaching. The reason it's difficult for Butoh is because Butoh, rather than being a line, is like a rhizome. You know, it's like a Japanese knotweed. It just keeps growing in all kinds of different directions, and so it began with this state of this place of emergence. In the parts, I have actually used the language of dynamic systems theory, because it's a really dynamic way that it developed. You know, it just sort of burst out and started to inspire and influence many artists. So I'll just go through the structure so you, well, not the structure. I'll go through the dynamic systems theory of Butoh to explain a little bit what is Butoh. So there was this stage of emergence, which was 1959, and then Tatsumi Hijikata got thrown out of the mainstream dance world. In the 1960s, as it was really emerging, it was really called Ankoku Butoh, which is translated as the dance of utter darkness, not just darkness, utter darkness. And so this was really a time when it was very wild and anarchic and attracting lots of anarchist figures like Natsu Nakajima, who was one of my teachers as well. And so, you know, there was this time in the Asbestos Can, the studio, where it was really a meeting not just of dancers, but like of the big literary figures of the time, like Yukio Mishima, Tatsuhiko Shibusawa, who was another writer, translator of some radical French literature of the time. There were visual artists who were meeting there. So it was really like an art movement where they were finding how they could work with the body to respond to the times they were living in. Now, many people will associate Butoh with the aftermath of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but Butoh did appear 14 years later, you know, so it was quite a long aftermath. So of course it was in relationship to that, but I think that there was still, you know, the effects of the war, the westernization of Japan really created this attitude of transformation and mutation, which I'll mention a bit later, that there was this suddenly experiencing culture, experiencing identity in a very radically different way. And that's why there was this big attraction to this place where they were developing Butoh. So that was this emergence moment, like explosion. Then in the 70s, Tatsumi Hijikata, who is the founder, started to work with structure. He started to work with choreography and working specifically with students in very much more the kind of lineage, like he was the master and they were the students. This part of the book is very much about the students, how this choreographic phase developed. And then in the sort of late, it actually began in the 60s, this dispersion that Butoh was very uncontrollable, that people got really inspired by it. Other artists, such as Akira Kasai, who was a contemporary of, he was younger than Hijikata, but he continues to dance today. And he just took the idea of Butoh and continued to work with it, but rejected Hijikata, actually. So he rejected who would be considered the founder, but continued to use the name. So did these other dancers, Masaki Wana, Ko Murabushi, whose text I just read a line from. So these artists in dispersion, so instead of just this line, it just started to move all over the world. And while we were talking earlier, that in Japan, Butoh is still quite niche and underground and people don't know it so much. But if you go to Berlin, everybody knows what Butoh is, you know. If you go to South America, everybody knows what Butoh is. So this dispersion really spread this knotweed, or I like to think of it as a field of wildflowers. It's not a plantation. It's not the same thing. It's like Butoh is the field and all these flowers grew all over it that, you know, spread all over the place. Ko Murabushi and Masaki Wana were involved in bringing it to Europe. Hijikata never left Japan, so he didn't carry it himself, but he had his carrier pigeons, who were these people. Complexity is the contemporary generation in Japan. Yuko Kaseki is actually based in Berlin, but Takao Kawaguchi and Yukio Suzuki are artists who are in Japan, and they don't necessarily call themselves Butoh dancers. So they integrate Butoh into their practice, but not in the same way that the generation of the 60s. It's not Ankoku Butoh, it's not the Butoh Fu of the structure phase. It's not this group, but it's, for example, Takao Kawaguchi, who's also in the book, he's using it more in a performance art way. So working with how to replicate Butoh, not to develop it, but you know how it continues as something that can be replicated through bodies. And Yukio Suzuki is actually working with contemporary dance, but he doesn't call himself a Butoh dancer, but he definitely has a background and basis in Butoh. And then the last part of the book is called Exhaustion. And this is a conversation that I had with Kuniichi Uno, who is known as the philosopher of the body. He got to know Hijikata in the 70s or early 80s, actually. He was very inspired by Butoh, and he was the only doctoral student of Gilles Deleuze, actually. So he's a fluent French speaker, and he writes in French, actually. So I was very honored to get an interview in French with him, actually. So he closes the book in a way. So just a little, I'm a little bit like Butoh. I don't speak in linear ways. I weave all over the place. So, so you'll have to bear with me. These are drawings that I did, actually. I did them as part of my PhD, where I was looking at ways, I'm really interested in the transmission of knowledge and how to transmit and how to transduce. And the word transduce means like a transformation of energy, actually. So these were drawings that I produced developing some of the Butoh methods within my contemporary art PhD. And so I use these images in the book. they're scores. I think of them as scores that are transmitting the energy of a movement. And for each part of the book, so you have emergence, that thing emerging over there, out of structure, and then the structure, and then the dispersion, and the complexity, and the exhaustion is over here. So yeah, let's just have a look. I mean, I think that images can be very evocative to understand some of these early days of Butoh, which are really exciting. And yeah, this is the founder and the co-founder. Tatsumi Hijikata is on the right, actually, and Kazuo Ono is on the left. In that early phase, which is really considered the more anarchic, and it's more about happenings than about dances or theater. So the founders, the founder and the co-founder, again, they have a very interesting relationship. They are a total generation apart. Kazuo Ono, who is on the left, he was in the war. He was in a prisoner of war camp for 7 years, actually. So he really experienced the war, and he danced really to deal with a lot of the trauma that he had experienced. And what is very particular about Kazuo Ono was that when he came back from the war, and he was the only survivor, actually, of this prisoner of war camp, he decided that he wanted to dance as a woman, as the mother energy. And it's not drag. You know, I remember being in Japan and going to a conference and someone said, "Oh, but that's drag." And it was like, no, that's not drag. It was that he really wanted to find a very different energy to resist the kind of aggression that had created the war as well. And so Tatsumi Hijikata was a child during the war, but he found his inspiration in the body of Kazuo Ono, actually. So, you know, it really developed through this relationship between the two of them very much. So, you know, you can imagine Kazuo Ono is like the mother, and Tatsumi Hijikata is the father of Butoh. You can maybe think of it in that kind of way. And yeah, just to say, like, it was really to address a lot of the taboos in Japanese society. You know, this kind of breakdown of beliefs, even in the whole emperor system after the war, that the emperor had to say that he was not related to the gods. So there was this real transformation in the whole sense of identity as well. And one of the first things was to address gender very much, but also nationality, also hierarchy. And Yoshida Ono used to tell us that Tatsumi Hijikata used to sometimes wear women's underwear so that he could feel, you know, how, you know, these genders, these binaries are embedded within the things that we wear, in the ways that we move, like how the clothes that we wear even influence the way that we move. So yeah, they were wearing dresses here, but it was really to explore gender in these different ways. Just have a quick look at the time. Yes. Natsu Nakajima, she was one of my teachers for 3 years. Sadly, she passed away the year before last, quite suddenly. But just reading, I'll just read it out so that you're not trying to listen to me and read at the same time. The most difficult thing to teach about is how to be, how to vanish humanity, social humanity. It is important to be unconsciousness, or the material body, the neutral body. We need this. This is the most difficult part to teach, how to vanish humanity. So maybe you can relate that to the work with the bamboos, you know, to feel the emptiness, to relate to the emptiness and the strength of the bamboo at the same time. And this idea of emptying is really important, and it's not just a spiritual idea. It's not just a Buddhist idea that you're empty. I mean, of course, that's part of it. But the emptiness is also getting rid of a lot of the labels that society gives you. And in Japan, it's a very codified society where there are labels, there are names, there's a hierarchy, you know. even in language, there's very much this awareness of where you stand in the hierarchy. So vanishing this social humanity, as Natsu Nakajima is saying, is kind of finding this utter darkness inside yourself. And maybe you'll remember the question I asked you more about emptying the body. So this is Yukio Waguri, and he was one of the students. He's in the student section. So he really worked with Hijikata in that phase of Butoh, which was very much more theatrical. So after this phase of really like happenings and this very art, like an art movement with so many different disciplines and people, including Yukio Mishima. But in the 70s, it became much more about creating a theatrical form and almost like a continuation of kabuki, which is a traditional theater form in Japan. So Yukio Waguri, he says in this transmission conversation I had with him, which is really wonderful, he says that Hijikata wrote that when we empty our body, something comes inside our body, and our body will be filled by something and explodes in small explosions. The nikutai, which means the flesh body, in Japanese, runs away, but after the body has run away, then the body is now empty and will again be filled. This is the process or rhythm of Butoh. Okay. So this emptying, you know, the way that I think of it in my own practice and in my own teaching is really about availability. You know, once, if your body is filled with ideas of who you are, where you stand, and of course we need that, you know, the role and everything, but availability is to be open to what we don't know, and that's part of this darkness, this utter darkness, that Hijikata would also say you should drop a ladder. People who want to be creative should drop a ladder inside themselves and eat from their darkness, you know, eat of the unknown, which is not who they are and their roles. This is this will explain a bit more. Ko Murobushi, who wrote those lines I read, he's part of the dispersion people, so he just had a very small contact with the founders and co-founder and just developed his own version of Butoh. So that's why I'm saying it's very hard for lineage, because it's more these wildflowers. He writes, well, he says to me, actually, this is in our conversation, he says, I always think, what is my name? My parents named me, but it's not me. It's just one role, and I don't think it's correct. I felt this is not what I am. I have the same feeling with my sexuality. I'm a boy, but I also felt something different. So that's what this emptying is about. You know, it's not just some. It's kind of questioning, and just one more thing from Masaki Wana, again a wildflower who had a short contact with the Butoh founders and then went to live in a remote, broken down farm in Normandy, which is where I spent a lot of time there. Very wonderful artist. He was also a filmmaker, and he says that the three essential aspects for defining Butoh dance are whether or not you're dancing your interior landscape, that dark landscape that you don't know, if you can dance dark intentions, I mean, to dance completely, not only the positive aspects of life. Contemporary dance occupies the positive, and Hijikata chose the darkness. Butoh goes against aesthetic beauty and explores disability, handicap, and illness. If the dancer can develop a personal method, that's one aspect also. In contemporary dance, on the other hand, there is a hierarchy of form and there is a benchmark. So that's aspects of what Masaki Wana considered Butoh. This is a wonderful photo I really love. And so the title of this talk is From Post-War Japan, Japanese Butoh to a Contemporary Rebellion of the Body. And slowly we're going to move into that contemporary rebellion of the body. I just want to make sure, yes, I've got a little bit more time. So this is a picture of Tatsumi Hijikata, who was a bit of a provocateur, holding a watermelon and walking past riot police at a protest in Shinjuku in 1968. And he says, he wrote, to a production-oriented society, the aimless use of the body, which I call dance, is a deadly enemy which must be taboo. He also said something else which I think is really relevant, and I have been thinking a lot about this quote. He said that his work was his profession. So let me remember the quote exactly. He says, "I am a body shop. My profession is the work of human rehabilitation, which goes today by the name of dancer." And I think this is really relevant to today, to a contemporary rebellion of the body today, that there's a lot of protests going on around us. I'm sure that we're all aware of what's going on in the US, what's been going on in Iran, what's been going on in London and various other places, that people are really using their bodies, putting their bodies on the line, wanting to live their politics through their bodies as well. This, yeah, so Kubikukuri Takuzo is somebody who was always putting his body on the line. A big inspiration for me as well. He's not a Butoh dancer. He doesn't consider himself a Butoh dancer. He was inspired by Butoh. And what he would do, he would hang himself from a tree in his garden every day, just to experience life, you know, to experience his own life and to put himself at the edge to see what was meaningful to him. I was very fortunate enough to witness this and experience this, and I write about it in the book. When I saw this performance, action, life, existence, I think it was a form of existence that I was witnessing. It really touched me and inspired me in how I was going to take Butoh into my own practice and to make it resonate with the times that we live in. That I'm not Japanese, I didn't experience the war, but I live in a world that has many problems, and our bodies and the way we live and the way we exist through our bodies is something that is very, it's the core of my art and of my life, I would say. And this is my project that I have, the way I've taken Butoh forward is what I call Butoh Mutations. And so it's part of my pedagogy, it's part of my activism, my form of gathering people together to do crazy things, inspired by Butoh. I have some crazy people in this room who have joined some of these gatherings. um, so mutations, you know, Butoh is very much about mutation, about metamorphosis, of transformation, of like this kubikukuri, putting yourself on the edge to be in that in-between zone, this temporality in Japanese, which is called ma. You know, it's in between. You don't know what's going to happen in that space. And mutation, in the way I'm using it, it's actually inspired by a mystical philosopher. His name is Jean Gebser. He's Swiss. And he talks about mutations being, it's kind of anti-evolutionary and anti-progress, and, well, not anti, but it's not about this kind of linear development. It's about a sort of a state of emergence, that something happens, and normally he says it's crisis. Crisis creates a transformation of consciousness, that we suddenly see ourselves and our lives in a completely different way, that what we had taken for granted suddenly seems completely, you know, how could we live with that? So, you know, there's this saying, to see the wood for the trees, but this is to see the wood for the trees for the wood. It's like being in a state of kind of oscillation of thinking, I've thought this, and actually things are completely different. So yeah, mutations is the sort of guiding principle, that this crisis that of the post-war is continuing, but on a global scale now. It's really on a global scale that we can experience this, and the importance of our bodies in this process. But for Jean Gebser, it's especially the experience of time. And he says that the crisis that we are living through now, which actually started after the war, is it's that time is transforming, that time is becoming much more intense, that this phase will be about the intensity of time. The time stops being sequential and linear. And so that's why I think that Butoh is really a great practice for experiencing the intensity of time. So this is an action that I did on the last day that I was in Japan, just over 10 years ago, that I was doing my research. And I went into Shimbashi, which is the financial district. I dressed as a salaryman, so the Japanese people will know what I mean by a salaryman. But in Japan, people who work in what's considered the city in London, but Shimbashi, or who have these salary jobs, are called salary men, because normally it's men, and they wear a specific kind of costume, which is a black suit. And so you see a salaryman here, actually, but I'm dressed like a salaryman. And I went and I collapsed while everybody was running around Shimbashi. I did this very slow decreation, exhaustion, giving into the exhaustion and gravity, which lasted about 40 minutes. And if you want to see it, you can look at my website. It's very interesting because nobody looks. They just walk past. They look like extras. It's like a film, actually. And so this collapse, which started a decade ago, has continued to grow and develop in my practice. It's a bit like this kubikukuri hanging himself in the garden. It's not as extreme as that, but it's a way to take stock of what's going on. And so I've started involving people, and one of the collapses where I first involved people was the one that I did for Brexit, actually, because we had this Brexit going on. It just, as anyone who lives in the UK knows, it just went on and on and on, and it didn't happen when it was meant to happen. And so on the day that Brexit was meant to happen, I invited a group of people who just all wanted to go and collapse out in King's Cross, just by the Eurostar place, actually, thinking of Europe and what was going on. So just to transform time, a kind of ritual that we get out of this, or next thing, and to feel the intensity of the moment. Collapse has become really part of an art form as a pedagogy, of just sharing this form of experiencing, of knowing. So it's a bit like this, what I was talking about at the beginning, this direct transmission. It's not about speaking. I can't exactly tell you because your physical experience would be different from mine, but that through the collapse something happens. And here I am teaching the students of the Vienna Institute of Applied Arts how they can experience collapse and feel the intensity of time. And this one was a wonderful collapse that we did in the City of London with a group, some of the people who are here. 35 of us went on a blustery day, gale force winds, and we went and we collapsed. We all collapsed for an hour. It was 1 hour. And even though we were in what's called a privately owned public space, even the security guards couldn't get rid of us because they didn't have a clue what we were doing. And somebody told them we were meditating, so they just left us alone, which was really wonderful. And this was just the last moment of the collapse. And there are more. I'm planning a collapse in Avignon actually this year. So anybody who's curious and wants to get into the direct transmission, you can join the collapse in Avignon. You can come and talk to me later. How long do I have left? Should I 5 minutes? Good, then I'll be finished in 5 minutes. Part of the mutations of my Butoh to experience what, the time that we are living in and this intensity of the time that we're living in is to work with technology, actually, because I think that technology is really influencing the experience of our bodies just from being on our phones all the time. Just look around and everybody has got their head like this. So really about the impact of the computational technologies that we have on our bodies. And Natsu Nakajima, my teacher, when I said to her, you know, what should contemporary body be, contemporary Butoh be, she said, art has to be physical now. It really has to be physical. So I really started, I came up with this word somatic revolt because I got a lot of pain from working on computers to the point that I just couldn't work on computers anymore. And I felt it's my body revolting. You know, it's doing its own rebellion of the body. It's saying, this is not what you should be doing. And then you can get all the ergonomic tools you want to try and put you into the place that you're going to be productive. And, you know, you're going to feel that somatic revolt. So in my PhD, I really started to work with Butoh, but in very different ways, and working with technology to create technologies that are very different from the technologies of smartphones and computers, and working with handcrafted technologies. I'll show you a very quick video of something which is really like part of what Hijikata called Butoh Sei, which is Butoh sentiment. You know, it's not just about dancing Butoh, it's about how Butoh influences the way we make and the way we think of materiality. And so this is a very short clip of an instrument. This is an instrument, it's a computer. It's very, very short. I don't have loads of time, but you can look on my website and see more about it. But it's a computational tool that is made out of crochet and that you wear, and that it really, it creates a composition from the interactions, the relationship of the body to the environment, and picking up electrical signals in the environment as well. And this is my current project. It's called Scores for Unknowing. I'm working with a collaborator, Mika Satomi. She's an electronic artist. She's amazing. She creates computers by hand with traditional crafting techniques of weaving, embroidery, knitting, sewing. Amazing computers that look nothing like a laptop or a smartphone, basically. And so we got a little fund last year to work on this project, Scores for Unknowing. And we're working with AI, with an AI voice model, 3 AI voice models actually, who are all speaking to each other. And the idea started with how, so the choreographic phase of Butoh, which was in the 70s, it's called the Words of Butoh, Butoh Fu. It was when Tatsumi Hijikata was working with his students. If you read the book, you'll know all about it. He was using utterance as a form of choreography, not writing, not drawing, not demonstrating, using poetic utterance and working with the affect of the utterance. So we started using this AI voice model to work with the affect, you know, the kind of immediacy of sound, how bodies can react immediately to sound. But the question in working with AI is, how could AI be a tool in helping us to get into states of not knowing? Not knowing. It's not like ChatGPT, can you tell me how, you know, this, or make a summary of this? It's like, how can we use AI as a tool that can allow us to go into states of the unknown, and what happens from there? So in this piece, I was with Mika. We are composing, we kind of live composing in between these different models. And the models are almost like they're a support structure, but they're not the main thing. It's not about creating knowledge with AI. It's AI, and especially the latency of AI, these models that we're working with are very much about creating an unknown space where we don't know what the output is going to be. So it's about unpredictability rather than predictability. And so we're continuing to work on this project, developing this choreography of Butoh with AI voice models. And just a final quote from Byung-Chul Han, a society obsessed with production does not have any access to strong play, to death as an intensity of life. And in the Scores for Unknowing, we're very much working with strong play. How can we create a space that enables this kind of play? And it's not just playing around, it's like that there's something at stake as well. So, thank you so much. I'm sorry if it went on for quite a while, but we have some time for questions, actually. And just before the questions, I'll just say there's books which are going to be on sale at a special price after the talk, after the questions. If you can't get a book because there's not enough to go around, they are at a special price today, but you can also get the QR code, and there's a promo code that you can get them as well. And there's also information. I have a workshop next week that I'm teaching. So if you want the direct transmission rather than just reading and you really want to dance, then you're very welcome. So yeah, questions? Yes.
Okay, early on in your talk, you referred to the human body as an alien form. Now, as I see it, the human body is as natural a form as any other biological entity. So I can't see how it can be described as alien. Alienated, yes, but not as alien. Could you explain what you mean?
Sure, thank you. I didn't describe it as that. That's Komabushi, this dancer who you saw, this picture. I mean, I think that, of course, you have to understand Komurabushi's thought a little bit more. I think that, and I don't want to interpret his thought either. I don't think it's my place to do that. But I think that there was a real dysphoria of his own body from my conversations with him, that he was very ill at ease in this form of his body, that maybe there was something and I'm sure many people have that experience. That's not my experience, but there was a feeling of not quite inhabiting his body, and he talks about it in the conversation a lot more. In that quote, yeah. I hope that answers the question, but have a look at the book also. So there's a big chapter on him, so he's interesting.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation and sharing your work and work of this masters. I'm just curious how Butoh, in the way how you understand it and experience it, maybe can address the, I guess, addressing the nature and maybe speaking to nature, like singing for, I don't know, a river or a mountain. And is there a space for this in Butoh? Or in mutated version of Butoh?
Thank you. Yes, yes, absolutely. In fact, if I'd had another hour, we could have gone into it way more. But yes, I mean, you know, this body material and maybe this alien form maybe that Komabushi was talking about was that when you have been in this habit of just seeing your body as some kind of like brain taxi, just taxiing you around the world, that suddenly you start experiencing as the matter, you know, that's really what it is about. It's not just about using your body to tell something or illustrate something. So it's experiencing at the pure level of matter, emptying all these things of I'm this, I'm that. So my understanding is, and the way that I work with this in my own work, it's not about expression. It's about getting to a state of your own materiality that you can be in relation to other materiality, to the materiality of a river, to the materiality of a tree. You know, it's not dancing with a tree, and it's the same thing with the bamboo. You know, that's what Yoshito Ono was really getting at. So today there is this field of ecosomatics, but I think that ecosomatics has existed in many practices, like Tai Chi Chuan is a completely ecosomatic practice. You know, it's about how you breathe this chi that is the chi that creates the mountain and creates the river and creates the lake. So actually, I feel that there is a very strong connection between Tai Chi Chuan and Butoh. Of course, there's the influence of Taoism in Japan, definitely, and the influence of Buddhism that came from China. But you know, and also Shinto, the Shinto, I wouldn't call it a religion, but the animism that is the perspective on nature that is in Japan is very much an ecosomatic practice. How to live in harmony, you know, through your body. So yeah.
So thanks very much for a very interesting presentation. And I think speaking to some of the questions that have come up and also the answer that you've just given, we also know that the 60s and 70s were a period of great transformation in the way that dance as a form evolved everywhere, all kinds of different dance. So obviously Butoh has a specific relationship to a more spiritual tradition, but the learning from the master is common to all forms of dance. That's really something that's happened. How do you think Butoh, do you think Butoh speaks to these other movements, or these other movements have some relationship? I'm thinking particularly of the changes that took place in contemporary and modern dance and ballet. So all these kinds of forms of dance which started merging and changing in the way that people stopped wearing shoes, started dancing in different kinds of clothes, suddenly not wearing sort of formal clothes which were considered the attire of dance, but wearing flowing gowns and bits of cloth and things like that. Just a sort of comment of how it speaks to it would be interesting. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, of course, these artists were definitely influenced by other forms of dance, specifically German expressionist dance. So there was, you know, Butoh is neither traditional nor is it completely Japanese. I mean, they were very much influenced by Ausdruckstanz from Germany, as well as the French writers like Antonin Artaud, Jean Genet. But they, like, Tatsumi Hijikata was a ballet dancer as well. He was a jazz dancer and a ballet dancer. So although they were maybe not influenced directly by like the Judson Church, or yeah, some of the big dancers in ballet or contemporary dance, although Frederick Forsyth was a big influence as well on later aspects of Butoh, and he was specifically interested in the choreography of Butoh. But I mean, I think that they, like Tatsumi Hijikata specifically, was really in his one solo, which I should mention. It's called Rebellion of the Body. It's 1968, the Rebellion of the Body, and he dances. I mean, if anyone's seen Butoh, what Rebellion of the Body doesn't look like what you would think is Butoh. He's dancing in all these crazy clothes, flowing gowns. He's dancing with a dildo, like a huge golden dildo. Um, and then and you know, he's kind of like wanting to push against the idea of what dance is. That's what he was doing specifically in Rebellion of the Body, and try to see what lies in dance beyond any kind of form, you know, because Butoh is very formless in that way. That's why it's very hard to think of a lineage, because what do you pass down? You know, you're not going to just pass down what happened in the 60s or what happened in the 70s. So it's really like a way of experiencing your existence rather than a form of dance. So yeah, it's yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the Swiss philosopher you mentioned and the effect, how you maybe interact with in your work with that philosopher? And also, could you repeat the question you asked right at the beginning at some point?
Well, I'll start with a question that I asked at the beginning. Let me just find it again, although I think I remember it. How do you live existence through the body you inhabit? Yeah. The philosopher is called Jean Gebse. He's considered an integral philosopher and a mystic, and his most famous book is called The Ever-Present Origin. It's huge. It's like this. I'm going to get onto it at some point. I've just been too busy writing a book and then a PhD, but I'll get onto the book, The Ever-Present Origin. He's really tracing through these transformations of human consciousness that happen over the ages, and specifically in relation to art, to ritual, and to myth. And so he really sees this, what he calls the aperspectival consciousness, that there was these different, so I was talking about the wood for the trees, that now we are in a time of, that the perspective is almost like a multi-perspectival, but it's not multi, it's like aperspectival. And so this is linked to this mutation, transformation of consciousness that he's talking about. And he looks specifically in this book at how art is how art reflects these transformations in consciousness, like cubism, for example. And to me, I think that, and that's my interest in Butoh, Butoh is a sign of a mutation, of a completely different perception and perspective on embodiment, which relates to the question, you know. If you're always like thinking, I know, but once you reflect, oh, how am I experiencing through this stuff? Yeah.
So when I hear the word by John Gebse, I feel it's very similar to Merleau-Ponty's concept about the body, that you experience world through body. I can't precisely bring his words now, but then do you see any link? So phenomenology, basically.
So between phenomenology and Jean Gebse or Butoh?
John Gibson's the word, because the word he said, how you experience world through body.
I think it's a little bit different. I mean, like I said, I haven't read that huge Bible of the ever-present origin, but I think that phenomenology is to really bring the experience into the experience of the body. You know, I've actually trained in microphenomenology, which is an incredible research method, which is really about reporting on these states of phenomenological inquiry. But from what my understanding of Jean Gebse, he's talking about our perception, and maybe that's why he's called a mystical philosopher, because he's not talking about knowledge, he's talking about consciousness, which is much more thorny in a way. It's like our consciousness is our perception of reality, the reality that we are living in. So, I mean, you know, if you start reading some Indian philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, you can get deeper in what that perception, you know, how reality, there isn't one form of reality, it's based on our perception. And I think that that's what Jean Gebse is writing about. And he's influenced by some of his contemporaries, like Sri Aurobindo, who is an Indian philosopher who also wrote a lot about integral yoga. So it's like, how can we make our bodies ready for this transformation of human consciousness, not just my body, but that our sense of reality is transforming because of a period of crisis. And maybe we're in it right now. I mean, so it seems like it.
Okay.
Thank you for the talk. That was really interesting. I'm just listening to what's being said, and I'm kind of thinking that it's kind of paradoxical in that you've got to empty the body, but then fall into this darkness. Because to me, emptying the body is to be open to a vast non-linear expansion. But falling into the darkness is about seeing how you then exist within the world. So there's this kind of paradox of kind of moving between, like, I think about non-duality, and then considering how your body becomes alien and falling into that darkness is kind of, it's not a question, it's just a kind of thinking over the thought process.
Thank you. That's a great question. But now I just want to ask how long we have, because I could speak about that. Do I have a few minutes? Yeah. That's a really great question, and thank you. And I can talk to it actually about the alien form. One of my teachers, let's go back to him because he's great, and I love this. Masaki Wana, wonderful teacher. Yoshito Ono as well talked about this. There is this perspective which exists in No theatre. Now, No is a traditional form of Japanese theatre. It's considered the most ancient form of living theatre in the world. And Yoshito Ono and Masaki Wana used to talk about this way, this perspective. So we're talking about mutations and our sense of what is reality and consciousness and non-duality and everything. And that there is this perspective, this way of witnessing the body, which is a technique in No theatre, which is called in Japanese Riken no Ken. And it means the detached viewing, that you see yourself, and this is considered the height of the art in No theatre, that the actor empties themselves to such an extent that they can be filled by the audience's dreams, thoughts, the audience's own memories, their life, their existence. They can be filled by the existence of others. So, you know, if non-duality is the collapse of the subject-object duality, this technique, and of course we're talking about a performance technique. No theatre is a performance technique, and Butoh was, you know, it's about sharing your existence through the performance, not telling a story. To me, and this is what fascinated me in my PhD, actually, which I took on, you know, how could I develop practices for detaching the eye, for developing this kind of awareness? And it's not a perspective like the subject-object is like over there that you can judge, that you can critique, that you can name. It's a step further almost. It's like this perspective, and the way that Masaki Wana described it, it's like you can see yourself from beyond the audience, so that you become this whole organism together. But you have to kind of empty yourself in order to allow the audience to have this kind of non-dual experience. So you're holding that from this kind of detached, maybe alien. The way I drew it, it was like someone watching from another planet. But it's a joyful perspective. It's like encouraging that moment in time to happen. So it's a little bit complex, but you know, I think that it has been considered. And in No theatre, when it was redeveloped by Zeami Motokiyo in the 15th century, it was very much influenced by Buddhism, and it was really about transmitting, you know, not telling, but transmitting these stories from Buddhism about death. You know, there's always ghosts and death and yugen, the space of ghosts, to normal people. So I think that that you mentioned non-duality, and Buddhism is a non-dual, so is Taoism actually. I think that it's part of Butoh, and the continuation, the mutation for me as a spiritual practice as well.
I was thinking about your project of the collapse. In a usual sense, that we see collapse as what we need to pay emergency attention, because usually people lost conscious and dropped. on the floor. But then you said it usually you are trying to do it for 40 minutes or 50 minutes and so on. So I'm sure it's a very slow process to be end on the floor. But then if one of your participants or some of your participants decided that collapse wanted to make it into realistic and they kind of dropped and then hit back of a head or something, can be quite dangerous. So how are you gonna kind of instruct, or what's your concept of this collapse? Can you explain a bit more?
I actually did collapse on the back of my head the other day. I'm lucky to be alive. I fell right here, so I did collapse. I've collapsed twice in the last few months, but no. Like I said, the collapse is a form of pedagogy. You know, it's so there is a meeting and we gather and it's a kind of community. I don't just take people out into spaces and say, collapse now. No. We meet, we exchange, we witness each other. We really engage with the pedagogy of it, you know, what it brings up, and it brings up a lot. You wouldn't believe it, but it brings up a lot. And it's not about slowness. It's about phenomenology. It's about a micro-phenomenological dance with gravity that, you know, we take it for granted that we're walking, you know, and that's why we get a lot of tension. The more we take it for granted that we know how to walk, the more tense we get. But as soon as you start sort of like going into your exhaustion, and exhaustion is the last chapter actually, that you start to feel your head weighs 5 kilos, your arms weigh a lot. Butoh is also called, compared to a corpse desperately struggling to stand upright. That's the reality, you know. If you realize that every time you're walking, you're kind of out of balance and you might just fall over and collapse. So it's, you know, it's sort of like taking that to a granular level. And the granularity is very much part of this embodied listening that I talked about at the beginning. Even, you know, the way that I wrote the book, through paying attention to the granularity of things. And I think that this is what Butoh is doing, is like, how can you pay attention to the granularity of your existence at every moment, which of course it's difficult when you have a busy life because you just get lost in all these wonderful things that are happening to the body. But yeah, it's not this dangerous thing where people can just go and hit their heads. But I fell on the snow and I did that, so it can definitely be dangerous.
Thank you so much for your talk, Dominique, and also thank you very much for lots of questions from audience. Now it's time to finish, and we are going to have a drink reception downstairs. So we hope you can enjoy. And book sales is now open downstairs, so we really encourage you to visit and get it. And as Dominique mentioned, today is a special discount price, 30%. So please visit. Thank you so much.